Never eat gas station sushi, I promise you. Food poisoning will be the least of your worries. It all started early this morning. Typing this out was hard for many reasons, but you'll understand why by the end of this. Just bear with me. I had a craving for sushi, but I'd gotten off work way too late to pick up anything from the local hibachi place in town. As my truck barreled down the road, I couldn't help but think about how long it had been since I'd actually eaten anything, though I always skipped breakfast and I'd woken up a little late for my 7 p.m. shift, so I'd slept right through lunchtime. Tonight had been so busy that I barely had any time to breathe. By the time I clocked out at 3 this morning, it finally hit me that I was starving. In all honesty, I could have eaten just about anything, but my taste buds had a hankering for some type of sushi, so I caved. I stopped at a gas station and parked my truck in one of the many empty spaces near the front of the store. The little silver bell on the door let out a shrill scream the second I shoved through it. My work boots tracked in a bit of mud, but the floor looked like it hadn't been mopped in ages, so I didn't feel too bad. As I moved towards the back of the store, where the deli items were located, my eyes landed on several types of sandwiches: tuna salad, roasted chicken, honey-baked ham, and pimento cheese. There was a hot dog machine on the counter. The dogs wrinkled and dry. I scrunched up my nose. The smell pungent and strange. It almost smelled a bit rancid, but that's not what I was there for anyways. The second my eyes landed on the last box of sushi, I easily pushed that thought to the side. As I snatched it up, I peered through the clear container to try and figure out just what kind it was. It definitely wasn't fry, but it didn't look like any type of sashimi either. Four perfect cylindrical rolls laid neatly beside each other on what looked like a bed of folded parchment paper. A dab of wasabi was smeared in the corner, and a few slices of thinly cut pickled ginger was nestled up next to it. There was no label and no expiration date, so with a quick glance around the gas station, I brought the box up to my nose and sniffed. It smelled fine, so I shrugged and toted it up to the cash register. I shuffled in place for a few moments, waiting for someone to come slinking out of the back of the store to check me out, but that place was dead as a doornail. That's when my eyes caught sight of the sign next to a little silver bell perch on the desk. Ding the bell for assistance. With a small tap, the bell tinged, and within a couple seconds, a slim brunette woman appeared. A small smile tugged at her lips as she grabbed the sushi and typed in the number on the side of the container. "Is this all for you today?" Her hands were already shoving it into a bag before I spoke. "Actually, I was wondering what kind of sushi is that. There wasn't any label or pricing, or it's just a California roll," she blurted out, her face instantly paling. Her eyes were shifting between me and something behind me. I raised a quizzical brow. "Are you sure? That doesn't look like crab meat." Her eyes pleaded with me not to probe any further, once again flickering between me and something behind me, impositive. "It's probably because it's imitation crab meat." She awkwardly laughed, her hand shaking slightly. "Your total comes to $10.52. She squeaked, eyes barely meeting mine. My hands dug around in my pocket, producing 2 5s. I dug around a little more for some change when I noticed something odd in the reflection of one of the convex security mirrors. A man stood near the back of the store close to the restrooms. His hulking form took up the entirety of the small hallway as he leaned against the wall. Something sharp was nestled in his hand. The filthy fluorescent lights glinted off of the metal. I squinted my eyes and then paused. I dropped the change onto the counter, stilling, when I realized what he was clutching, a knife. A hand shot out to clutch my own, frightened blue eyes catching mine as her trembling lips mouthed something I couldn't quite make out. Regardless, she now knew that I knew what was going on. Despite wanting to dart out of that place like my pants were on fire, I couldn't help but feel some type of sympathy for the woman. She was much too small to fight him off, and I'd feel horrible if I just left her here to deal with this situation on her own. Who knows what sick, twisted ideas this man had in mind either way. I figured that none of them would be pretty. So I had to be strategic. I needed to keep her talking until I could figure out a plan. That man was clearly waiting for me to leave before he made his move, or perhaps he was sizing me up. I was a pretty big man myself, towering over most of the shelves in this gas station enough that I could see the dust that coated everything in a thin, gray film. The sound of the cash register slamming closed was what brought me back to her worried expression. Her small hand reached out before she said, "Sir, would you like a receipt?" I almost instinctively said no before I saw something scrawled on the other side of the paper. "Please don't leave me here alone with him." My eyes softened as I met hers, my mind coming up with a million things to talk about until I settled on a plan to help her. "Yes, he'll take that." I took the paper from her hands and shoved it into my back pocket. "Actually, do you have any soy sauce packets?" The woman nodded. "Yes, I think I've got some extra packets." Her eyes drifted behind me for a second before she reached under the counter and held up the packets. "Are two okay?" Her fingers trembled, dropping one of them onto the floor. I heard her quietly curse before she hurriedly picked it up and slammed it on the counter next to the other. "Anything else?" Her cool blue eyes watered as she sucked her bottom lip in between her teeth. I tried to scramble for any way to stall, watching as he neared us. I fumbled for a response before I ripped open the sushi container and popped one of the pieces of sushi into my mouth. "Got any chopsticks?" I blurted out, speaking through a mouthful of food. Once again, I watched as the man halted in place before she nodded, ducking under the counter. That's when I realized that the flavor of this sushi was really off. In fact, something crunchy was stuck in between my teeth. I tugged it free, but had no time to examine what it was before she popped back up again. "Here you go," she whimpered, shoving the chopsticks into my bag, eyes darting behind me once again. Her skittish behavior had me on edge, and I couldn't help the feeling of unease that settled over me as I glanced up at the mirror once again. The man was now standing in between the candy bar and the chip aisle, a strange smirk plastered across his face. I watched as his tongue darted out, trailing along the blade of the knife, a rope of saliva stretching from his tongue to the knife like melted mozzarella cheese. A chill settled over my arms, the hairs standing on end. This dude was one sick son of a gun. My attention was quickly averted when I felt the cool sensation of metal pressed against the top of my hand. My eyes whipped back to the woman's, a wicked grin flickering across her lips. Before I could even react, she was moving fast, much too fast for me to process what she had actually done. In fact, my body was in so much shock that when she plunged the blade through the top of my hand, nailing it to the countertop, I had no time to scream. Instead, a quiet hiss left my lips, turning into an agonized groan as I stared at her in complete disbelief. Thick crimson began to pool around my fingertips. My eyes flew up to meet hers, only to see her winking at the man behind me. My attention quickly whipped up to the mirror again as he slowly stalked closer to me. What is this?" I managed to sputter out between clenched teeth. The woman's smile widened before she dipped a finger into the blood staining the countertop and brought it to her lips. I watched as her tongue swiped it off with a quick little flick. "You know," she started, her eyes darting back behind me before meeting mine, "you taste almost as delicious as you look." Before I could even respond, a car pulling into the parking lot caught the attention of all three of us. It swung into the spot next to my truck, and an audible sigh of relief left my lips when I realized that it was one of those blacked-out police cruisers. The woman cursed under her breath, wrenching the knife from my hand and tossing it under the counter. The man behind me halted, and then quickly ducked behind the circular deli cooler, crouching on the ground. The thin little brunette and I locked eyes before she gritted out angrily, "Don't you say a word." The both of us watched as he strolled out from behind my truck before walking up to the front door of the gas station. When I glanced back at the counter, I watched as the woman hastily soaked up as much of the blood as she could with a wad of napkins before she shot the menacing look. "Shove your hand into your hoodie, and don't you dare take it out," she threatened, tossing the napkins into the trash. I was quick to comply, cradling it within the fabric and hoping that it would help slow the bleeding. "Sir," both of us turned. The officer's arms settled across his chest as he stared up at me. "Is that your truck out there in the parking lot?" I gulped, feeling the blood soak into the pockets of my hoodie. "Yes, sir." "Is there a problem?" The officer scratched his beard before his eyes glanced at the woman, and then down at the strange stain on the countertop. His black leather boots squeaked on the dirty linoleum floor as he approached the counter. I couldn't help but follow his gaze as his eyes scrutinized the stain on the side of the woman's arm. "You spilled something, little lady. You've got something on your arm there." His voice was gruff and deep, something about it very nonsensical. I watched her bristle, eyes warily meeting as she tried to play it off. "Oh, just some soy sauce, that's all." The officer quietly hummed in response before he nodded towards the bag of sushi sitting on the counter, his eyes drifting to me. "Son, if you know what's best for you, I reckon you ought to know that gas station sushi is never a good idea." With a pause, he shrugged, speaking again before I could answer, "But I guess that's your prerogative." With a nod to the lady, he fixed his gaze back on me. "Young man, could you step outside with me for a moment?" I nodded almost too quickly. The officer raised a single, dark brow before he glanced down at the woman's name tag. "Georgia, would you excuse us? He'll be right back and to pay for that." She smiled sweetly at him before nodding, but as soon as he turned, her eyes narrowed, shooting daggers at me. "Sure thing," she responded, her hands nonchalantly wiping my blood from her arm. The second we got to my truck, the officer eyed me up and down. "You know those tags are expired, right?" Dumbfounded, I circled back behind my truck. I'd never been more glad that I'd forgotten to renew my tags. If he hadn't stopped by here, I was sure that something horrible would have happened. I shoved the thought aside, shaking my head. "No, sir. But I do sincerely apologize. I've been so busy that it must have slipped my mind." With a nod, I watched as he settled his thumbs into the belt loop of his pants. Well, luckily they're only about a month expired, and I'm in a generous mood tonight. I reckon I could let you off with a warning this time round. Thank you, sir. I promise we'll get those renewed as soon as possible. My hand was in agonizing pain, the adrenaline slowly wearing off, and I was sure the blood was going to soak through my black hoodie at any given moment. I wanted nothing more than to tell him what was really going on, but I also wanted to make it out of this alive. My eyes shifted to Georgia, her gaze fixed on mine before repositioning to the door. That hulking behemoth of a man who had been wielding the knife from before pushed through the door of the gas station and called out to the officer, "Everything all right. I think we still need him to pay for that sushi." "Just peachy," the officer replied before patting me on the back and motioning for me to head back into the store. "Go on then, boy." Everything in me wanted to beg him not to leave me alone with those psychopaths, but the moment I went to open my mouth, the words slammed back into the back of my throat. The second the officer turned on his heel, the man at the door flashed a knife at me, holding a finger to his lips. I begrudgingly lumbered over to the door before it hit me, the receipt. I still had the receipt tucked into the back pocket of my jeans. My uninjured hand slid into my pocket. Fingers frantically rummaged around, and then still, when they landed on the receipt paper, I quickly yanked it free and waved it in the air, my voice bellowing out so loud that it could have woken the dead. "I've already paid, actually. Got the receipt right here in my hand." My obnoxious tone got the attention of the officer, and I heard him clear his throat before he said, "Son, there ain't no reason for you to be hollering like that. Take that bag and head on home." The man in front of me growled, yanking the receipt from my fingertips before crumpling it between his fingers and trading me the bag instead. I hadn't even noticed that he had been holding it. The second my fingers snatched it up, I glanced back at the police cruiser still idling in the parking lot before slowly backing away from the man. When I finally made it to my truck, the police cruiser was getting ready to pull out of the parking lot, but the man was still staring at me, his cold, hardened gaze like that of a well-trained predator. "You know," he snarled, his voice sharp as razor blades, "you're the first one who has ever gotten away." With a pause, he turned on his heel to head back into the store. The last few words he muttered haunted me for the whole rest of the day. "It's a shame. Really, we could have made so many sushi rolls out of you." Vomit crept up my throat as the bag slipped from my grasp. Fear coursed through me like white-hot lava as I slammed my truck door shut and shoved it into gear. I've never driven so fast in my life. When I finally pulled into my driveway, disbelief and disgust clawed at my insides. If I wasn't nauseous already, I certainly was now. My eyes slowly glanced down and my stomach heaved. Blood had begun to seep into my jeans, the hoodie pockets now too full to contain it. When I finally stumbled into the house, my mouth crusted in vomit, my girlfriend was quick to jump into action. I'd never been more thankful to be dating a nurse. After she got me all stitched up, gauze and bandaging wrapping the entirety of my left palm, she quietly sat across from me, her eyes full of worry. "Colton, what the heck happened tonight?" With a shake of my head, I met her concerned gaze before managing to push a few words past trembling lips. "Never eat gas station sushi, I promise you. Food poisoning will be the least of your worries. Story 2. Be careful what you wish for in gas station bathrooms. It might just come true. I know how this sounds. That title alone is sketchy, and I know what I'm about to tell you is going to sound absolutely off the wall bonkers, but I need you to hear me out. I don't think any of you are going to believe me, but I'm telling you right now, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Just give me a chance to explain myself. It all started with an argument, but that was normal for Rhett and me. Well, correction, he did most of the arguing while I just sat there, defeated. Matty, come on, he groaned, his hands flying up in the air as we slowed to a stop at a red light. Don't act like you don't know what you're doing going around in clothing like that. His fingers pulled at the material of my dress before continuing. I mean, look at you, you're begging for attention. No wonder Spencer couldn't keep his eyes off of you. His hands slammed down on the steering wheel angrily, the action making me flinch. But that's my best friend, Matty. Listen, I'm sorry. I didn't know what I was wearing would cause such a scene. In all actuality, I wasn't sorry. In fact, I was tired. I was tired and fed up and done with all of his bullcrap. I was wearing a plain black dress. Sure, it hugged my curves, but there was nothing revealing about it in the slightest. Don't freaking give me that crap. You knew exactly what you were doing. The second the light turned green, his foot pressed down on the accelerator hard. The car lurched to attention as he gripped the wheel, his knuckles white and his jaw clenched. Rhett, please, I don't want to fight. Can we please just? A hard slap stung my face, the horrible cracking sound filling the silence of the car. I was dumbfounded he hadn't ever laid a hand on me. The stinging sensation made my eyes water. A small hiss escaped my lips as I winced quietly, the pain radiating across my face. And then came the warm feeling of something dripping from my nose and onto my new black dress. You deserved that. Rhett sneered at me, almost like he was reassuring himself that his actions were justified. Act like a whore and you'll get treated like one. I just sat there, mortified. My hands swiped at the blood as my eyes fought to hold back tears. They were threatening to spill, and the last thing I wanted was for him to see me cry. So I did the only thing I could think of. Rhett, can you pee? Please pull over at that gas station over there. I need to go to the bathroom. I stumbled over my words nervously, hoping that he would listen. I was surprised when he complied, his lime green Camaro skidding to a halt in one of the parking spaces near the front of the gas station. The second he threw it in park, Rhett looked over at me and said, "No funny business." And then he eyed the attendant working the counter. The guy was familiar. Aaron Rivers. He was in my occult studies and parapsychology class. If I see you talking to him any longer than necessary, I won't hesitate to come in there and get you myself. With a nod of my head, I went to open the door before he tugged me back down and grabbed my chin. My hands shook slightly before I realized what he was doing. He swiped a finger under my nose, cleaning up the evidence of his abuse before he glanced over at Aaron again. Hurry up. I don't want to be out here all night. Choking back a sob, I nodded and hurried into the gas station. Aaron was quick to greet me, but I waved him off as I darted to the back of the store and headed into the bathroom. The moment I stepped in, I broke down. Wretched sobs racked my body as I searched for a stall to sit down in. The first stall's toilet was clogged, toilet paper and feces floating around in the bowl like a thickened brown stew. The second stall was a mass, feminine products overflowing from the small trash can beside the toilet. Bloody tampons strewn across the floor like a crime scene. And the third stall was surprisingly clean. A breath of relief left my lips as I hurried into it and locked the door. As I sat down on the toilet with my head in my hands, weeping like a baby, I was reaching for the toilet paper to dry my eyes when I noticed something strange. The first two stalls appeared as if they had seen better days. The paint chipped and the hardware broken or damaged. They were also painted a muted color of blue, and unlike the first two, the one I was in was painted a bright shade of firetrick red. But that wasn't what really caught my eye. It was the number and message staring back at me from the stall door. Wish you may, wish you might call this number and wish things right. The number below those strange words stared back at me temptingly. As I wiped the last of the tears from my eyes, I contemplated calling it, my sadness slowly melting into anger. I ripped my phone free from my purse, thinking about all the times Rhett had made me feel stupid, humiliated me, made me feel like an object, like I was just something that he could use and then toss when he was finished. I thought back to the interaction we had 5 minutes ago, the way he didn't even hesitate to slap me. I punched the number into my phone, gripping it tightly, my hands shaking as I waited for an answer. I knew exactly what I was going to wish for, the words fighting to push past my lips. I just didn't know how I wanted to word them. The second the phone was answered, though, I paused, a whisper floating over the line. Wish you may, wish you might call this number and wish things right. The fluorescent lighting of the bathroom flickered for a moment as a chill settled over my body, goosebumps crawling up my arms. I wish that Rhett Kellers would. My voice wavered as I fought to grit out the words between clenched teeth, my anger simmering dangerously close to rage. I wish he would. Frustration bubbled up and overflowed as I punched the stall door and screamed into the receiver. I wish he would freaking trip over a fork and die or something. My voice rang out harshly, echoing off of the grimy bathroom walls and spiraling all around me. The moment everything went quiet, my chest heaving as I fought to control my breaths, I noticed the light above my head flicker again. A crackle sounded over the phone, my hands fumbling to hold it closer to my ear. I waited for only a second before I heard it. Wish granted, and then the call disconnected. I pulled the phone away from my face, took a deep breath, and leaned up against the stall. I knew that it was probably just some stupid, fake, pre-recorded message or something. But now that I'd gotten that off my chest, I did feel a lot better. With a turn of my heel, I reached to unlock the door and froze. The number and the cryptic message were no longer there. In fact, the door was perfectly clean and blue. My mind was spinning, but I didn't have long to think about that before Rhett's name flashed up at me on my phone. My eyes darted to the time, 11:11 p.m. Shoot, I'd been in there for way too long. Fear coursed through me the second I scrambled to answer, an apology already dancing on the tip of my tongue. Rhett so. Hey, I came in to get some nachos and I realized I forgot my wallet at the party. Spencer said he would bring it to me tomorrow, but I need you to spot me a couple dollars. A sigh of relief blew past my lips as I shoved open the stall and walked towards the bathroom door. Sure, yeah, I can do that. The second I stepped out, I dug through my purse for a couple of dollars before heading over to Rhett. He was standing at the cheese machine, a heaping mountain of liquid gold glistening upon layers of chips. "Hey," he turned, his finger pointing towards the packaged plastic utensils. "Can you grab me one of those? This gas station cheese sticks to your fingers like cement." I handed him the money, nodded, and grabbed one of the packages. I started to unwrap it for him before he yanked it out of my hands and turned to head up to the cash register. Before he could make it, though, I froze, stunned, when he turned and slipped on a puddle on the floor. A bright yellow wet floor sign glared up at him as he slid, almost dropping his nachos in the process. He did, however, drop his utensils. I waited for a string of curses to fly from his lips before he stepped forward and tripped again. And once again I stood there in stunned silence, this time not because he tripped, but because of what he tripped over. Horrified, I watched the gruesome scene unfold before me, my eyes as wide as saucers and my brows raised. One of my hands flew up to cover my mouth. It was like it happened in slow motion. In one fell swoop, his foot tripped over the fork, catapulting it up into the air for a second, the prongs facing towards the sky before Rhett landed on it with a loud, meaty thud. The second it pierced through the vein in his neck, it was a bloodbath. Crimson splattered up like a fountain before pooling around him. There was no way anyone would believe this, but then I remembered Aaron, standing across from me. Taryn glanced at me, and then at Rhett. Fear coursed through me as I watched Rhett choke and sputter before he finally laid still. That should have been impossible. What were the chances? Aaron was quick to rush to my aid, my legs suddenly feeling like jello. I'd never seen so much blood the second he guided me to the office in the back and sat me down. I passed out cold. I don't know how long I was out, but I awoke to Aaron's voice gently coaxing me awake. Once I finally opened my eyes, I noticed that he was crouched down in front of me. But no matter what I did, I just couldn't rid my mind of the image of Rhett's blood seeping into the grout, staining it red. It wasn't until Aaron gently patted my leg and spoke that I realized it was all my fault. "Matty," he said, his voice smooth and soft. My eyes met his warm brown ones, that horrible sinking feeling in my gut beginning to spread as thoughts ran round my head like a train, all of them flying off the tracks. I'd brought this upon him. I'd called that number. I'd made that wish. You know, he started, his voice breaking me from my hysteria. His hand came up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. It serves him right, really. My brows furrowed and my breathing stilled. "What do you mean?" "It's what you wished for, isn't it?" His eyes gleamed up at me mischievously, all of the comfort from before replaced with something much more sinister. Dread. I didn't mean, I stuttered, but I did the number on the bathroom stall. The words I'd uttered in a fit of rage, the wish. Had he been the one to do that? And if so, how? Don't worry about it. Aaron whispered. I've already taken care of everything. The blood's on my hands, not yours. Confusion clawed at me, twisting and curling around my mind until I was finally able to push what I'd been thinking past. Trembling lips. What did you do?" He opened the office door, pointing towards the trash bags sitting just outside of it. "Remember what he told you in the car. How would you act like a whore and you'll get treated like one?" He paused. Does that ring a bell? Anger and embarrassment burned at my cheeks. I didn't know what to say. How he knew that was beyond me, but hearing it once was bad enough. Hearing it twice was like getting slapped all over again. "Listen," Aaron started, hand coming up to cup my face. His thumb lightly brushed over my cheek, the same one that Rhett slapped, the skin angry and red. "Act like trash," he whispered, the corners of his lips tugging up into a wicked grin, "and you'll get treated like it." Story 3. There's an old gas station in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. If you ever see it, keep driving. Shit. I wrenched the steering wheel over to the right, causing the tires to scream in protest. A deep horn blared loudly, almost rupturing my eardrums, and the interior was momentarily illuminated by harsh white headlights. For a split second, my life flashed in front of my eyes, and then I felt the bumpiness of the grassy edge of the road jostle me around. The 18-wheeler, which had veered into my lane, missed me by less than a foot, blasting by in a blur at what had to be 70 miles an hour or more. After a split second of catching my breath, I jabbed the driver's window switch down and stuck my head out into the pouring rain asshole. I screamed at the retreating logging truck, though I knew the driver wouldn't be able to hear me. A moment later, an outraged woman's voice tumbled from the speakers of my rented Chrysler 300. "I beg your damn pardon." Regaining my senses and remembering I'd been in the middle of a phone call, I sat back down in the seat. "Not you, Aaron," I said apologetically. "If you didn't hear the commotion on my end of the line, I almost got splattered all over the front end of some moron's Peterbilt who wandered over to my side of the road there." Was a moment of silence from the speakers, and then my agent let out a small snort. "Well, isn't that just grand? You've gotta love idiots on the roads these days." It took a softer tone. "I'm glad you didn't get into an accident. Ow. I don't feel like losing my best client and close friend in one go." I laugh. "Helps me relax to know you care," I admitted. Then, after a moment, getting the tension out of my muscles, I pulled the car back on the road and continued on. It was the winter of 2022, and I was on my way to a book signing in Seattle from where I lived in Gold Beach, Oregon. I was a writer who had just broken the New York Times bestseller list with my debut novel, and as such, I was on the start of my book signing tour, which would take me around the country. Obviously, as many people would quickly realize who I am if I used my real name, I have changed it, along with others. Aaron, my literary agent, had suggested I fly to Seattle from the airport in North Bend, but am someone who's had a major anxiety over flying ever since the September 11th attacks in 2001. So, instead, knowing I had purchased a new car to replace my rather shabby and broken down one yet, she'd arranged me a rental, and I'd begun the almost 7.5-hour drive north. I wouldn't have had to deal with those dingbats if Interstate 5 hadn't jammed up with that accident, I muttered. "Well, you were the one who wanted to drive." Hal Aaron's chiding voice came through the speakers. "Do you have any idea where you are?" I glanced at the GPS map for what had to be the 100th time. The screen almost seemed to glitch, jumping as the antenna on top of the car attempted to communicate with an orbiting satellite above. Piece of shit. "No, this stupid navigation system is apparently on the fritz," I snorted. "So much for Enterprise being a good car rental company." I looked back up just in time to see a sign with the gas symbol flash past. "Thank you, God, for small favors," I thought. "Hey, there's a gas station coming up soon. Am a bit low anyways. It'll stop there. Get directions and then call you when I'm on my way, okay?" There was a sigh on the speakers. "Okay, just please try not to be too long. The publishing house won't like it if you show up to your very first book signing late tomorrow," she said. "He'll be as quick as I can," I said reassuringly, then pressed the red disconnect button on the steering wheel, ending the call. I let out a sigh of relief. Aaron was my saving grace and had been the one to orchestrate my contract, including a very nice advance. But after a while, it became exhausting to deal with her. I stared out the windshield at the two-lane road in front of me, relishing the silence, save for the rain pelting the car's windshield, the windshield wipers flicking it off, and the tires on the wet pavement. For a few more minutes, all I saw was nothing but endless trees pushing in close to the road, almost seeming as if they were jostling to see who drove up and down past them. Then, almost as if my thoughts had summoned it, I saw the bright lights appear ahead on the right like a lighthouse beacon. It was clearly one which had been here a very long time. The overall appearance gave the impression it had been around since at least the 1950s, if not earlier. I grunted with surprise as I saw the lit-up station logo swinging around in a lazy circle on its pole, the faded green outline of a brontosaurus and similarly weathered red letters spelling out Sinclair were ones I thought I would never see in person. Seeing as how the company had gone defunct back in March, guess nobody told the owner of this one that. I pulled into the station, my tires driving over a small black wire which caused a classic bell to ding loudly twice, somewhere out of sight. Pulling up next to the green pump, I shut the engine off and relaxed back into the comfortable leather, listening to the tick of the engine cooling down. As I closed my eyes, I could only hear the loud buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead and the rain pelting the metal awning over the pumps. I opened my eyes as I heard the rain peter out and looked around, glancing at the analog clock on the dash, illuminated by the overhead lights. 7:30 p.m. 10 minutes had passed. I sighed. "Come on, man," I muttered, then quickly tapped the horn. The blaring sound of it almost seemed to shatter the stillness like a baseball through a plate glass window. Still nobody. "Damn it," I whispered, then unbuckled my seat belt and pulled on the handle, using my foot to kick open the door. A bitingly cold wind smashed into my face as I stepped out onto the cracked concrete, causing me to flip up the collar of my coat in response. I glanced around, only hearing the sounds of the wind whipping through the trees, crickets chirping, and what had to be the hoots of an owl somewhere off in the forest beyond. The garage bays were open, and in the faded yellow light of what had to be old incandescent bulbs, I could see what looked like a 50s Cadillac and a 70s International Scout up on the lifts, but no mechanic in sight. Leaning back into the car, I leaned on the horn, longer this time. Again, the sound reverberated off the trees and station. For some reason, I shivered at the nose. It almost feels sacrilegious to disturb the silence out here. I shook my head. Where the hell had that thought come from? I shook it away and waited another minute or so. There was still no sign of life. Maybe the station is actually closed. The thought was worrying. I hadn't seen another sign of civilization, aside from the dumbass logging truck, in 2.5 hours. I didn't know how far it was until the next town or gas station, and as good as the Chrysler had been on gas, I didn't want to try driving further on only a quarter tank. I decided to find out for myself, slamming the driver's door closed with a loud thunk. Stepping around the front of the car, I walked across to the open bays, the sound of my footfalls echoing back at me. I glanced around, noticing the spilled oil on the ground and mismatched tools. Bottles and hoses heaved unceremoniously on the bench in the back, but still saw no one. Great, I thought, looking up to see the bright moon begin to appear from behind the clouds. I began to turn and stride towards what had to be an office or convenience store when the figure burst out of the door, nearly causing me to jump out of my skin. I involuntarily let out, receiving a good-natured laugh in return. "Sorry, sir, I didn't mean to startle you, let alone make you wait so long." I caught my breath, then let out a strained chuckle and looked up at the man. He appeared to be in his late 40s or early 50s, dressed in a green Sinclair jumpsuit, adorned with the same green dinosaur on the front patch. The patch on the other side proclaimed the man's name to be Harold. The remaining hair on his head was slicked back, and he flashed me a smile with surprisingly bright white teeth. I held up my hand, giving it a little wobble, and gave a laugh of relief. "Don't worry about it, man." For a second, I thought this place was permanently closed or something. I said, the steadiness returning to my voice. "No, sir. Just the fact it's only little old me working the night shifts," he declared, chokingly wiping his brow. I snorted and smiled. The man clearly had a decent sense of humor. "I'm guessing you need gas?" he asked, changing the subject to business and gesturing to my car. I nodded. "Yes, please. If you could fill her up with regular." He nodded, then began towards it as I jogged back around, opening the driver's door and pressing the button to pop the gas cap. Harold let out a low whistle as he pulled the pump from its cradle. "Very nice car, sir," he exclaimed, looking it over. "It looks expensive." I shrugged my shoulders. "It is a nice car, a Chrysler 300S, but unfortunately, it's not mine." He looked up at me and cocked an eyebrow as he slid the nozzle in and pulled on the handle. "It's a rental," I added quickly, realizing it sounded like I'd jacked it or something. He seemed to relax. "Ah, that makes sense," he said jovially. "It's nicer and newer than anything we normally see out here usually." I jerked my thumb at the open bays. "I'd say you have people with good taste around here, seeing as how that's a 55 coupe DeVille back there," I said. He laughed, nodding approvingly. "I see you know your cars," he said with an impressed tone, glancing at the readout on the pump. "I do. Love 'em," I replied. He looked back up at me. "So, are you some kind of auto collector or race car driver, then?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, afraid not. Am a writer." He jerked his head up, his green eyes seeming to twinkle in the fluorescent lights. "A writer? Well, blow me down. I never thought I'd get a too honest writer in my station," he exclaimed, smiling. I nodded, feeling a slight sense of uncomfortableness wash over me. I still hadn't gotten used to the reaction people had when they learned of my profession. He pressed forward. "What kind of books do you write?" he asked excitedly. "I write in the horror genre." Honestly, I admitted, causing him to smile widely at the news. "Horror is my favorite style of books to read," he said. "I love everything from the old classics to Stephen King." He looked at me quizzically. "How many have you written so far?" I held up a single finger. "Just one published. I'm actually on the way up to a publicity signing right now." He nodded approvingly, then looked back at the pup before speaking again. So, have you ever seen anything truly scary? I raised an eyebrow at his question. That came completely out of left field. What do you mean by that? I asked in return. He still watched the pumps, but reply. So many horror writers I've heard about talk about how they've had their own frightening experience. Whether it's a plain old scare or even a supernatural experience, it's what helps them write truly horrifying tales now. He looked back at me. His face held a smile which caused me to inwardly shudder a little bit. It almost seemed far too wide for a moment. Then, blinking, I realized it was just a regular grin, if not just a bit of an odd one. The lights must have caused you to see things. He finished. So I was just asking if you'd ever had a scary experience which got you into writing horror for a moment. There was silence between us as I pondered his question, only broken by an owl's screech somewhere in the gathering darkness. Then I shrugged. Honestly, I hate to disappoint you, but no, I admitted. He gave me a slightly surprised expression. Really, I nodded, deciding to be honest with him. Really, to be completely truthful with you, Harold, as much as I love horror, both writing it and reading and watching it, I've stopped being scared of it a while ago. The surprised expression seemed to grow on his face. Really, he repeated, then looked down at the bump again. That's a shame, he said, his voice almost holding a trace of sadness in it. I nodded, having to agree with him. It is. I used to love getting scared by a good horror film or book, but as I got older, it just seemed to, drift away. Now I just write what I know others are afraid of, like I did with my first book here, but honestly, when I write, I don't feel that fear in me at all. I hated admitting it, even when I'd given my first online interview with a magazine about my novel. I'd lied about it, saying that my own work could scare the hell out of me, but in a way, it felt good to finally admit the truth to someone, even just a stranger I'd likely never see again. I looked up to find him giving me a rather intense and, honestly, extremely creepy stare. His green eyes almost seemed to glow in the lights, and his smile had completely disappeared. I took a step back at the abrupt change in his demeanor, but just as quickly it, too, was wiped away, replaced by the smile I'd known since he appeared. Well, I'm sure if you search hard enough, you'll find that feeling again, he said, his voice filled with what sounded like genuine empathy. I nodded, looking out at the woods. I hope, I truthfully admitted, then heard the sound of the pump finally clicking off. All done, Harold said happily, pulling the pump out of the car and replacing it back in its cradle. He looked at the readout. That'll be $23.17. I started slightly under 20 for a box for 3/4 of a tank. I hadn't heard of gas this cheap since I was at least a teenager, but at the same time, I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. I reached into my back pocket, pulling out my wallet, and from it my credit card. Do you happen to accept credit? I asked, half afraid he'd tell me he didn't. But he plucked the card happily out of my hand. Of course we do, mister. He looked down the name on my card, Mr. Damascus. The credit card reader, however, is back inside the main building. He gestured back towards the door he'd exited from. Would you mind if I took it, tacked there, and ran it? I shook my head. No, by all means, go right ahead, I said, and he turned away and strode back across towards the building. He'll be back out with your receipt quicker than you can say, Bob's your uncle, he called. I let out another laugh at the phrase I hadn't heard in years when I noticed something. I hadn't seen the man's back since he'd appeared, and this was my first time. The back of his jumpsuit was the same stained green as the front, with a red all rag peeking out of the back pocket. But my eyes were drawn to one thing. What looked like a large tear in it, just below the large logo patch adorning the back, almost as if it had been slashed. I could see an equally stained white shirt underneath it. Hey, I called out to him. He stopped and turned back to me, still smiling. Yes, he asked. I pointed to my own back. Your jumpsuit has a huge tear in the back of it. Just wanted to tell you in case you didn't know. For a moment, the same funny look came over his face, and then he waved his hand dismissively. Oh, I know. I haven't had a chance to mend it yet, he said, then, holding up a finger, pulled open the door, causing a bell hung from the inside handle to jingle, and stepped inside. I was left alone again, with only the buzzing sound of the lights almost causing my ears to ring in the sudden silence. Not wanting to seem rude by waiting back in the car, I instead walked to the front and leaned against the hood, staring out into the night. My eyes absent-mindedly drifted off into the gloom as I waited for Harold to return. That's when my eyes finally glanced over at the large sign directly ahead of me. It was the one which advertised the price for gas by the gallon, and as ID pulled in from the other way, not to mention getting caught up talking, I hadn't even looked at it. You could easily tell it had fallen into a bit of disrepair, as the light inside, which allowed you to see the prices at night, flickered on and off, precariously, seeming as though it would burn out at any second. You could even hear it flickering loudly in the silence. That wasn't what drew my eye, though. No, what drew my eye was the prices displayed on that flickering sign. There's absolutely no freaking way, I whispered to myself. I scanned down, but kept looking at the top to figures, 88 cents a gallon for regular. I felt a small wave of confusion fall over me. No matter how out in the middle of nowhere this station was, there was no way that it would charge that little for gas. Not to mention, it showed prices for both unleaded and leaded gasoline, something that had been banned since at least the mid-90s. As my mind attempted to process this, something else finally sunk in. The entire forest around the station had fallen silent, and I'm not talking a normal silence either. The crickets, the owl, the rustling of what I'd thought were deer or elk in the trees had vanished. Even the wind had seemed to stop. It was an almost unearthly stillness, as if the entire forest were holding its breath. It was beyond unnerving and eerie, to say the least, and it caused a shiver to shoot up my spine. The only sound I could hear was the almost maddeningly loud buzz of the overhead lights, which seemed to drone like that of a growling creature. I realized every muscle in my body had tensed up, though I couldn't understand why. Sure, the silence is eerie, but it's nothing to be truly afraid of, I thought. As much as I repeated that thought to myself, I couldn't help but feel increasingly on edge in the stillness. Okay, fuck this, I said finally, the sound of even my own echoing voice sounding just off to me. Pushing myself off my hood and beginning for the door Harold had gone through. As I walked, I looked at the watch on my wrist, seeing another 15 minutes had passed since he'd left. Where the hell is he? Letting out a sigh both of frustration and to try and relieve some of the odd sensation forming in my gut, I finally reached the door and reached out, gripping the handle. It felt almost shockingly cold in my hand, and I quickly twisted it, opening the door and causing the bell to jingle, sounding too loud in the quiet. I stepped inside and allowed it to swing shut behind me, the bell giving another jingle, this time muted in the building's interior. I looked around. Aside from an old Coca-Cola machine in one corner of the room, there were no food or drinks in here. Instead, the 2 or 3 aisles taking up most of the space were filled with what looked like older-style cans of motor oil and other assorted automotive bits and bobs, all adorned with the dinosaur logo. I drew in a breath, then coughed a little. It felt more than a little musty in here, as if it hadn't been aired out in a long time. Looking directly ahead, I saw the counter that Harold must usually be stationed at. An older-style cash register sat atop it, and behind it lay an open door marked Employees Only. Beyond was a long, tiled hallway which stretched out for a while before disappearing around a corner. I stared at the cash register. Haven't seen one of these old jobs since I was a kid in the 90s. I thought, a few nostalgic emotions breaking through my other emotions and tugging at my heartstrings. But it was just as quickly shooed away by the uneasy feeling that was settling over me like a cloud of dust. This whole thing, this whole place just seemed wrong. I couldn't tell why, but it was making my arms and legs feel as though insects were inching along under my skin. After a moment's hesitation, I opened my mouth. Hey, Harold? I called, my voice seeming muted, just like the bell had. I waited, no answer. Hey, Harold, are you back there? I called again. Still nothing. Feeling increasingly on edge as the fluorescent lights in here sounded like they were also buzzing too loud, I craned my neck to look down the corridor. Just barely at the corner, I saw the bright blue sign indicating a restroom. I made my decision, calling out again. Look, if you can hear me, Harold, am coming over the counter to use the restroom. Okay, I can't hold it until I get to the next town. It was a lie. I hadn't eaten or drank anything in the last 2 hours to make me have to go. But just in case he came around the corner, I didn't want to get into trouble, as odd as I felt. I still didn't want to piss the man off. Taking a deep breath, I hopped the counter and stepped into the corridor. Unlike the main room, this was lit by 3 or 4 incandescent light bulbs dangling down from the ceiling. It gave the hall a slightly dimmer look than behind me, and I hesitated for a moment before starting down it, taking care not to have my footsteps echo too much. The hall seemed to go on forever, but eventually I reached the corner. Wanting to keep up appearances, I turned the knob for the bathroom and opened it. After looking into it for a split second, I shut it quickly, suppressing a cough and a gag. It had looked disgusting, as though it hadn't been cleaned in years, if not decades. Turning back, I noticed a brighter light down at the end of the next stretch of hallway. I debated for a moment, then began down it. All I wanted was to be out of here. I passed another open door. Glancing through it, I saw the 2 garage bays and the view outside. The blast of cold, fresh air relieved me somewhat, and I continued on. As I reached the doorway, I looked around, seeing that it was an office. 2 desks stood inside, each with nameplates on the edge of them. I spied Harold's name on the far one. I also saw my credit card sitting in the middle of the table. The bright blue stood out among the dark wood and white papers. Letting out a relieved sigh, I crossed to it quickly and picked it up. I decided I'd just leave a 20 and a 10 in cash on the desk instead and get the hell out of here. I didn't know where the man had gone to, and every fiber of my being was telling me to leave. As I reached for my wallet, my eyes caught a plaque on the wall behind the desk, the fox gold glinting in the low light. I stared at it. The photograph was clearly Harold's, looking almost the same as I'd seen him, just a lot cleaner. Below, that was a declaration etched into the fake gold Employee of the Month, Harold Yankovsky. I couldn't help but smile a little at how hard he must have worked for it. Less than a second later, though, the smile dropped from my face as I read the inscription underneath it. August 1976. I shook my head, hoping that I was just seeing things in the low light, hoping that it would change to 2006 or hell, even 1996. But no, it remained the same. What the fuck? I breathed out, feeling another shiver go down my spine. There was absolutely no way that, if Head looked to be in his 40s or 50s in the mid-70s, that he would still look the same 46 years later. He'd at least be in his 80s or 90s now, and would very much not still be working here. What the hell is going on? I whispered again, feeling like tendrils of dread were reaching out of the gloom and jamming themselves in me. I turned to book it out of the room and out of the station entirely, but I froze as I saw Harold. He sat in an old-style black swivel chair, his back to me in the next room. I couldn't tell what the room was, as it was lit only by a single, very dim bulb directly over him, but the room was giving me off truly creepy vibes. For the first time in years, I felt the first inklings of fear. Before I had a chance to move or say anything, he spoke. "Well, Mr. Damascus," he said, his voice almost inflectionless. I began to speak. "Look, I'm sorry I barged back in here. It's just..." I was cut off as he continued. "Well, Mr. Damascus, how do you feel?" My shoulders slumped as I felt a wave of confusion envelop me. Excuse me," I managed out. "How do you feel?" He repeated, then continued, his voice finally seeming to gain some cadence to it. "Do you feel afraid? Do you feel fear?" He let out a low chuckle, one that almost seemed different from the happy one I'd heard outside. I didn't know how to respond. Finally, he spoke again. "It's okay. You don't have to tell me. I know. I can feel it." He let out another chuckle, and I felt multiple shivers shoot up my spine. "And, frankly, Mr. Damascus, am happy about that," he said, standing up, but still keeping his back to me. "Because you all taste so much better when you're afraid." This time I did manage to say something. The fuck it was the most eloquent response, but apparently Harold found it funny, as he let out another low, creepy chuckle. He finally turned towards me, and I jumped backwards, slamming into his desk and causing his nameplate to fall to the ground. The man still smiled at me, his smile now holding a very definite wittiness to it, holding an almost pants-pissing wickedness it. But he didn't seem live. His previously sparkling green eyes now seemed glassy and unseeing. To put it bluntly, he almost more resembled a ventriloquist dummy, a puppet, than anything. He almost seemed to lean towards me, and finally he spoke. "He'll make it sporting, though you have 20 seconds to run," he said. Swallowing hard, I looked around and saw a tire iron on his desk. I snatched it up, ready to club the man over the head if he made a move towards me. That's when he simply dropped forward onto his face. He fell halfway forward into the room and didn't move. I looked down at him and gasped as I realized what I was seeing. The man looked nothing more than like a deflated beach ball, as though all the organs and blood in him had been sucked out. I saw the tear in the back of his jumpsuit again, this time much more pronounced. Behind it, his dirty white shirt had been torn as well, and it revealed fuck me sideways a hole in his actual back. I could see the white of his spine clearly visible in the yellow light. As I stared down at him, I heard a voice. This one, though, was not Harold's. It seemed to come from everywhere, nowhere at once, much lower than I'd ever heard a human voice speak, and it alone almost caused me to piss myself, because it held a truly evil, sadistic tone to it. 20, 19, 18, 17. I looked up and into the darkened room Harold had fallen out of, and finally, for the first time in years, I screamed. Hovering just in the darkness beyond the edge of the dim light's gaze were two enormous, glowing green eyes. They were larger than a human's eyes ever could be, and in a very inhuman shape, looking like crescent moons. They held the most evil, sadistic glee I had ever seen in my life. At my scream, the voice stopped counting down, and it fucking laughed. A great, booming laugh that sounded like nails on a chalkboard, and then it began counting down again, the malicious excitement in it audible. 16, 15, 14. I didn't wait any longer. I didn't want to see what those eyes belonged to. I turned and I sprinted out of the office, running down the corridor, my footfalls and panicked breathing echoing back to me like a gunshot. The corridor seemed to go on forever, and I couldn't understand why it was taking so long to reach the corner. Finally, though, I reached it and froze. I was back at the entrance to the office. What the fuck? Behind me, I heard the voice reach 10, and I began sprinting again down the hallway. It seemed to take even longer to reach the corner, and this time I reached out to grab the corner edge with me hand only to grab the wooden edge of the office door. My eyes widened and I felt tears began to fall from my eyes as I ran again. The voice continued as I dashed for down the ever-increasing corridor. 7, 6, 5. I let out a strangled sob as I grabbed for the tiled corner, pushing off the edge of the corridor to snatch at it. Instead, I smashed into the wall next to the office door. I fell in a heap, trying to force myself up when I heard it finish. 3, 2, 1. Ready or not, Mr. Damascus, here I come. As it finished uttering the last word, the voice dropped even lower, as if I were hearing the voice of the devil himself speak to me. I realized if I looked behind me now, I'd see it, standing in the middle of the office, over its human puppet. I refused to look back. I knew it wanted me too. Tears flowed freely down my cheeks, mixing with the blood from my head where I'd slammed into the wall. Every horror movie death in movies and books flashed through my mind, and I knew all of them weren't even remotely as horrible as what that thing had planned for me. That's when a thought, just a tiny glimmer of hope, flashed through my mind. Something I'd seen as I'd walked down the hall to the office. I felt adrenaline course through me. I might die trying to do this, but I have to try, I thought. I heard the floor behind me rattle and felt hot, stinking breath fall across the back of my neck. For a microsecond I felt paralyzed with fear, and then I let out a strangled cry, exploding into motion. I heard a bellow of frustration behind me, followed by a laugh. It knew once I reached the end of the corridor, it'd use whatever power it had to bring me right back to it. It had power over this corridor, but it doesn't realize it left a weak spot open. The thought Still echoing in my mind, I ran, unable to keep myself from screaming this time as I dashed down the corridor. It seemed even longer than before, but as I reached the halfway point, I saw what I'd been hoping to spy. The door into the garages stood open, almost hidden out of sight behind a shelf of oil. I let out another cry, this one of determination. Behind me, I heard the creature stop laughing. Now, it let out a bellowing cry of rage, realizing what I intended to do. I felt it begin to thunder up the corridor after me, to snatch me up. The feeling of something sharp sliced across my back, and then I was leaping for the doorway and through it. I landed in a puddle of still sticky oil underneath the Cadillac. What I saw now was rusting away with decades of disrepair. Not wasting a second, I jumped to my feet and ran for the open bay doors. Behind me, I heard a louder bellow, but I didn't look back. I burst out from inside the doors into the night, now laden with the sounds of the forest again. I dashed for my car, almost flying over the hood, and ripped open the driver's door. Crashing into the seat, I stabbed at the start button, for a moment terrified that, like the typical horror click, it wouldn't start. But, to my surprise and gratitude, it did, the roar of the V6 thundering out. As I grabbed the knob to jam into drive, I risked one glance up, and I couldn't help but scream out again. The entire gas station had gone dark, the inside, the overhead lights, everything. I could see the outline of the building, but that was it, and the eyes glowered at me from inside the bays with absolute rage and hatred. Still screaming and staring at them, I slammed my foot down onto the accelerator. The tires screamed, and the car shot forward like a rocket, tearing out from under the awning and out onto the road. I refused to look in the rear-view mirror. I knew I'd see those eyes one final time in them, and I didn't want to. I just kept my eyes on the road in front of me, as far as my headlights reached, my knuckles white as I gripped the wheel and roared away from the hell behind me. I just about never let up my foot from that gas pedal, taking the corners far too fast. Not until the warm lights of the next town finally came into view, one I can't recall the name of. I felt myself beginning to cry, this time tears of happiness and relief. I drove straight through to the police station. I knew I could never tell them what had actually happened to me. They'd think I was utterly insane, or on something, but I could tell them I'd been attacked by a crazed lunatic at an old gas station. And that's exactly what I did. I burst in, begging to speak to someone. The officers at the desk calmed me down and took my statement, taking it all very seriously when I showed them my back, which, as it turned out, had 3 deep slashes in it. But when I told them where it happened, confused looks came over both their faces as a paramedic rushed in from outside to check my wounds. One of the officers walked into the back, returning with the sergeant on duty, an older gentleman in his 60s. "Please tell me again. What happened to you?" he asked gently. I did, and when I finished, he shook his head. "Son, it couldn't possibly have happened at the Sinclair station 10 or 12 miles back," he said softly. I stammered. "Why not?" I demanded, struggling for my words. "Because," he began, "it closed in 1979 after a huge fire gutted it, killing everyone inside. It's been almost half a year since that incident now. I never made my book signing, which earned me a furious phone call from Erin. Her fury disappeared when she heard I'd been attacked. I told her it had been from someone I'd pulled over attempting to help on the side of the road. I didn't want to repeat the same conversation I had with the police. They said they'd try and find whoever attacked me, but I know they never will. Not after they showed me a newspaper article, yellowed with age, showing the burned-out hulk of the gas station I'd been to, along with a very familiar photograph of a smiling man next to it. I still am a horror writer. The horror I saw that night didn't stop me from writing. My second novel is due out this year. But now, whenever I sit down at my computer and begin to write a truly scary scene, I feel the chills of fear from my own creation jolt up my spine. Because I know true horrors lie in this world, and I hope I never come across them again. I'm posting this here not only to tell the truth finally about what I experienced, but also as a warning to anyone who will listen. If you're ever in the Pacific Northwest, on a lonely two-lane road in the middle of nowhere, and you happen to come across an old-looking gas station lit up with a faded green brontosaurus logo spinning in the night, just keep your foot hard down and keep going, because you may not be as lucky as I was. Story 4. I had an incident at the gas station I used to work at. This is the story of an eerie night I had on the last night of my first job. I don't really believe in stuff like this, but it still gives me the chills just thinking about it. When I was fresh out of high school, I started working at a gas station on the rough side of town. The specific location was just off the exit to the highway, sandwiched between a motel and hotel. The rest of the street was littered with small run-down homes from the 60s and full truck stops for weigh-ins thanks to the location by the highway. As you'd expect, an 18-year-old microbial major didn't have a love for big rigs, wiping down gas pumps, or cleaning nasty hot dog grills. I was given the job by a family friend who worked for the company at a corporate level. They knew my family and used to come watch me play football. I had a reputation for being a bit aggressive and could hold my own, and I needed to. So naturally, I was the perfect fit to work a cash register and throw out late-night drunks. This may sound exciting, but the reality wasn't all that great. I would work second or third shift and often worked doubles from 3 p.m. to 7 a.m. on the weekends when someone didn't show up. I was always a night owl, and I needed the cash, so I was up for anything back then. In the summer, the place was busy. People stopped in by the dozens to buy drinks on hot days, buy a snack, or fill up while heading out for vacations. The winter time was less eventful. A morning coffee rush around 5 a.m., and at 7 p.m. a nearby factory would have break and swarm the place for snacks or a cheap meal. On the average day, I finished all my routine duties in under 3 hours, studied my books, and tended to the register as needed. When midnight hit, I would lock the doors, clean the place up, stock the coolers, and tend to customers through a revolving window. This made turning away drunks especially easy between the hours of midnight and 5 a.m. The real interesting people that I encountered came because of the hotel across the street and the motel directly behind the building. It was pretty common for a tired trucker to crash at one of these fine establishments for the night. Some stopped for rest, others for recreation. Drugs were dealt from the hotel regularly. Part of my job was to even sweep the parking lot for needles and other paraphernalia. During my first week, I even watched police walk into the hotel, carrying shotguns and rifles to drag a woman out by her hair before slapping cuffs on her. The real hot spot, though, was the motel. People went to the hotel to get high, but people went to the motel to get laid. Everyone knew the girls that lived there for long periods of time were prostitutes. I'd see them regularly stopping in. Some bought food, some bought condoms. There was always one in particular that caught my attention. No, I don't mean I was interested in her services. She just was what I thought of when hooker came to mind. As I would later find out, her name was Gabrielle. She was tall, thin, with gorgeous long blonde hair, considerably younger than most of the women from the motel, possibly 18. While the other women would come in chatting and shopping as if life was normal, Gabrielle was reclusive, shy, and hesitant. If it weren't for the fact she came in for condoms regularly, I probably wouldn't have even found out what she was. I would typically see her around 7 every night when the factory down the road was taking break, and the men would flock to her. When my first winter at the gas station began, I stopped seeing Gabrielle around as much. She seldom came inside to make purchases, and when she did, she looked pale and gaunt. Then after about a month, she never came by again. I hoped she made a life outside of this place, but realistically I knew she was probably just busy working. Life carried on like usual for me. I went to school, worked the gas station, crashed, did homework, and repeated the process all over again. On one particularly cold night in February, though I was locking up when I heard a subtle knock on the door. I didn't pay it much attention, since some people really didn't get the hint they couldn't come in after midnight. That's when the knocking grew louder and more frequent. I threw down the mop I was using and stomped over towards the entrance to give the guy a piece of my mind, but to my surprise, it was Gabrielle, shivering in the harsh, snowy wind in a skirt with a jacket that was more for fashion than function. It was hard to make her out face since the lights above the entrance began to flicker. She cried for help, and I gave in. I unlocked the door, and she stumbled inside, falling into me. I caught her by the shoulders as she buried her head into my chest, weeping. I was shocked. From what I had seen of the girl, she was an emotional robot with a permanent poker face. I guessed you could only stay numb so long before you break down. "I'm so sorry. I know you're not supposed to open up this late. Can I please use your phone? It's an emergency. I need to call my dad," she said. I was a bit stunned and curious, for father knew what she did for a living. I figure it wouldn't necessarily be a pleasant conversation, and something must be real bad for her to be forced to make that call. I looked down into her teary blue eyes. Her cheeks were gaunt, and she looked sickly. "What's going on? Are you hurt? Should I call the police?" Gabrielle clutched my forearms with icy hands, frantically shaking her head. I could see the bruises and discolorations down her arms. I didn't know if she was genuinely in immediate danger or just paranoia from drugs. "I know this isn't fair to you, but you cannot call the police. There is someone after me. Please just let me call him." I had locked the doors and brought her into the break room where nobody could look inside and see her. If anyone was trying to get to her, they weren't going to go through the wall. So for the time being, I gave in and chose not to call the cops. I handed her my phone and closed the door to give her some privacy. I could only vaguely hear a one-sided conversation. When I stepped back and Gabrielle wiped the tears from her eyes, she could only leave a message. I put my hand on her shoulder, and she asked if she could try to message him on Facebook Maybe his phone died and he was on the computer at home. I wasn't big on Facebook, so we had to quick download the app. She logged in and sent the message to no avail. I stepped out of the break room, peering outside into the harsh maelstrom of snow. Not a single car out there on that night. If someone was looking for her, they gave up or lost her trail some time ago. I brewed her a coffee and sat it beside her on the table. She was nodding off in the uncomfortable folding chair. I wasn't sure if it was from exhaustion or drugs. I closed the door softly, locking it from the outside with the key, and walked to the bathroom. The whole time I took a piss, my mind was racing. Something about this whole situation was unsettling. Gabrielle didn't look well, and for some reason the whole situation made me shiver. Literally, I was shaking and felt uneasy. I had to convince her to let me call the police. Again, the lights began to flicker, but this time throughout the whole station. I sprinted out of the bathroom to make sure Gabrielle wasn't freaked out. By the time I made it back over to the break room, Gabrielle was gone. I yelled her name out the recently unlocked front door. I could barely see 5 yards in front of me from the snow, and her prints were already covered with a fresh layer of powder. I never saw her again. The next day I got a phone call on my night off from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it anyways since I had been putting in applications to work in a safer environment and thought it may be a job offer. "Hello, this is Jason," I said confidently. "Why did you call me? Who gave you this number?" said a distraught-sounding man. I was confused and not sure what to say. "You called me. My name is Jason. I don't think I called you at all. Who is this? You called me last night leaving me that sick message. You think you're fucking funny?" I had to think for a moment when I remembered I gave Gabrielle my phone. "Sir, are you related to Gabrielle? I let her borrow my phone to call you?" The man grew angrier. "Don't say her name, asshole. If you ever call me again and leave me a message with her voice, I will call the police. I'm not a bad father." He hung up, and I stared at the phone in confusion. What the hell just happened? I racked my brain for a bit and checked my recent calls. The numbers definitely lined up, and whatever Gabrielle said on that message took roughly 90 seconds. I'm not really sure how much you can say that fast to fire someone up so much. I opened up the Facebook app, and sure enough, Gabrielle was still logged in. Her inbox was loaded with messages from her father. Most were begging her to come home, that he'd get her help and make her life right again. She never seemed to reply to them except for the message she sent from my phone. "It's all your fault." I looked at her feed more closely, though, and noticed she had 99 plus notifications. Dozens and dozens of posts on her wall. They weren't from concerned friends and family to come home, though. They were messages saying "I miss you" and overdue apologies. I grew more and more confused until I saw a post she was tagged and written by her father. It was with so much sorrow that I inform you that earlier this Monday morning, the body of my daughter Gabrielle was found following a lengthy investigation. Foul play is suspected. I'd like to thank those of you who tried to reach out to her and those of you who were there for our family in this time of need. Thank you. A chill ran down my spine and my hands shook. If Gabrielle died Monday, who the hell did I see on Tuesday? What did she say in the message to her father? I didn't go back to that gas station. Story 5. I hate working at the gas station, especially after discovering its dark secret. Every morning, it's the same thing, people lining up at the pumps that seem to always be full. I've seen fights erupt when someone cuts line at the pump, and, dear God, don't get in the way of them ordering their gallon-sized bucket of coffee to go with their pseudo-egg, wrapped in dough and deep-fried. Part of this nutritious breakfast. Every morning it looks like an army of ants on crack running around grabbing whatever food-type substances and drinks they can, then taking their usual position of impatiently waiting in line. I love the different poses. The foot tapper. Usually they have something stuck in their ear and can't hear their order being called. The heavy sigher exhales loudly every third time the watcher checks the time, and when the foot tapper has to be told to move up in line, as if anyone could hear him over the music that's blaring so loud over the speakers, making it so easy for everyone. Did I happen to mention I work here? Sometimes I wonder why after the things I've seen, not just the idiots, but other things, much darker things. But we'll get to that. Every morning I have to deal with these idiots. Is it still called road rage if you feel it in a gas station? As much as I hate them, customers are actually the easiest part of my job. I mean, who wouldn't want to go out in the middle of the night when the temperature is below zero and the wind is howling to change the bags in the trash cans because it's the appointed time? And who appointed the time, you ask? Why, the manual, of course. The corporate bean counters have done studies and run focus groups or some nonsense to decide the perfect time of day, or in this case, night, to empty the trash. It's all in the manual. The manual is your friend. The manual is your God. The manual must be obeyed at all costs. That's what the manual says. So if it's cleaning the toilets, emptying the trash, washing out the coffee makers, the manual tells us exactly when and how to do it. That's a load off my mind. I don't even have to worry about not knowing how to clean a toilet. The manual tells me. What it doesn't tell me is what happens when the power goes out only at our station every night at exactly 2:59 a.m. and comes back on at 3:01. I've seen this so many times. I watch the McDonald's beside us, and their lights never go out. What's even stranger is the security cameras never seem to pick it up. I've reviewed the recordings. No loss of power ever shows. What has happened is somehow the timestamp on the video suddenly shoots from 2:59 to 3:01 like those 2 minutes never existed. The corporate techies call it a glitch and tell me to ignore it. The rest of us don't mention it, not if we know what's good for us. But I know why it happens. I don't tell anyone for fear of being set to. Is it corporate who keeps us shaking in terror at the potential of letting outsiders know what happens during those missing minutes every night? Yes and no. It's something much closer, much darker, something that could. I guess the best way to describe it would be to tell the story of Kenny. I know. When I first heard his name, I did the famous line from South Park. Oh, no, they killed Kenny. It used to make me chuckle. I don't do that anymore. He started working here around 5 months ago. Wow, has it really been that long? Anyway, he was just another goofy teenager starting his first job after high school. Not that I was an elder scholar or anything. I only started here a year before Kenny did. He was fun to work with and we instantly became buddies. We loved to goof off during the night shift. Most nights it was just us working together. The place was usually dead from midnight until 5. We would rush around to get all our chores done so we had some free time. Yes, the corporate bean counters monitored us night and day. Big Brother was always watching. More than once we discussed the option of tearing down the cameras and visiting corporate headquarters to shove them well in some very interesting and anatomically uncomfortable areas of management's collective persons. I don't think it got stuck in there, Kenny said. I think it was processed this way. That would mean, I said, that someone was accidentally processed in the meat machine. Are we sure it was an accident? Even as the words came out of my mouth, I knew how ludicrous they sounded. That kind of thing only happened in the movies. And it Kenny's eyes locked on mine, and I could tell he was thinking the same thing. I looked up and saw that we were in the camera's view. Stick that thing in your pocket. Quick, I said. Kenny obeyed, and we went about cleaning up as usual, but I could tell it was bothering him. Forget about that thing, man, I told him. It was just some weird coincidence. How many chicken nuggets have you eaten from this place? He said with a haunted look in his eye. I thought for a moment, knowing the answer was much higher than I wanted it to be. In fact, thinking about the ring and the potential source for the meat in the nuggets made me feel ill. Doesn't matter. I won't be eating any more. What about that poor woman and her family? What about her? I said, my eyes nervously darting toward the nearest camera. Doesn't she deserve more than that? What do you want me to do? Hunt down her family and tell them where we found the ring? Kenny's eyes lit up. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Count me out of that, man, I said, hoping it would be enough to give him second thoughts about it. He shrugged and went about his cleaning duties, but from that moment on he changed. Every time he was on break, he would be looking things up on his phone. More than once I glanced over, and he was looking at missing person sites and making notes on ones that were in the area. The longer he investigated this, the less he was interested in anything else. I swear it was like he was slowly turning into a zombie. All he did was stare at his phone and make notes. One day I came in the break room, and he was just sitting there motionless. His eyes were open, but focused on some point off in the distance. It was the creepiest thing I'd ever seen. You okay, Kenny? I said. He slowly turned toward me like some possessed doll. I'm fine. I'm okay, I said. I know who she is. Who's the woman whose ring we found? Okay, who is she? She worked at the distribution center. You mean the company's distribution center, where we get all our products? He nodded slowly. How did you find that out? I asked a lot of questions. Asked who? He stared at me with an intensity in his eyes I'd never seen before. People. What people? He turned slowly and looked up at one of the cameras. It's not important, he said, looking away from the camera and resuming his unfocused stare. You okay, man? Yeah, I'm fine, he said in a monotone voice. It's just. I waited for a long moment for him to finish his sentence, but he just sat there like someone had hit his pause button. Just what? I said. He jumped like I had startled him awake. What do you mean? What? I said. You were talking and just stopped. I did. Yep. What was I saying? That's what I was trying to find out. What? Yep. No, what? What? I shook my head in frustration. Never mind, I said, walking away, leaving him sitting there staring into space. I couldn't figure if he was messing with me or if something had happened. Had he really been tracking down where that ring came from? Had he really run across some people who had scared him so bad they turned him into this zombie? I decided it was time for some answers, After our shift was over, I followed him home, only he didn't go home. I came round the corner of the massive building and found him sitting at a picnic bench, smoking a cigarette. I stayed back and watched, shocked that I'd never seen him smoke before. I wondered why he would break in here just to smoke a cigarette. The answer came quickly. The door of the warehouse opened and 3 people stepped out. I held my breath thinking he'd been caught, but he was calm and continued to sit at the bench. They chatted for a few minutes, then they all got up and went back inside, Kenny included. It was brilliant. He slipped right inside. No fuss, no muss. I figured, what the hell? It worked for Kenny as I walked up and sat at the same picnic table. I didn't know how long it would be until the next break, so I tried a different approach. I knocked on the door. For a few minutes, no one answered. Each time I knocked, I became more anxious that a security guard would show up and arrest me for trespassing. Finally, after knocking, the door opened. I stepped back when I saw a security guard standing there. I hesitated. "Well," the large man said in a deep voice. "Well, what?" was all I could think to answer back. "Well, are you gonna come in or not?" It took my brain a moment to comprehend what he'd said. "Sorry, yes," I said, diving through the door. He shut it behind me with a loud bang. It sounded like my doom. I knew he was on to me. He was just getting me inside so he could contain me, and I couldn't get away. I stood there, vapor-locked, unable to move for fear of what the guard would do. He stared at me, his eyes boring into mine as though sucking every secret out of me. "What do you think you're doing?" he said. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," he said, folding his arms in front of his massive chest. "No, I promise I don't know anything," I said, hoping my knees wouldn't start knocking. "All right, enough of this," he said. I started to shake. I'd never been to prison. In fact, I'd never gotten in serious trouble in my life. And now here I was, breaking and entering. Even though I didn't really break, I just knocked and entered. I wondered if the judge would take that into account. "You've had your break, now get back to work," he said. I stared at him, dumbfounded. "Excuse me." "You heard me. The company doesn't pay you to stand around. Get back to work." "Yes, sir," I said, feeling the weight of a prison sentence lift from my shoulders. I took a step, then stopped. "Which way is it to where they process the chicken nuggets?" The guard rolled his eyes. "Freaking newbies," he muttered. "Follow the red line." He pointed at the floor where several different colored lines ran down the middle of the hallway and disappeared into the distance. "Thanks," I said, quickly following the red line away from him. It led down a long hallway and right up to a large set of double doors that read, "Processing." I looked left and right, but there was no sign of Kenny. I stepped in through the double doors to a huge room full of conveyor belts. I looked around, but it was impossible to tell anyone apart when they were wearing hairnets and face masks. I hadn't made it to steps until I heard, "What do you think you're doing?" A woman dressed in a white coat accosted me. "You know you're not supposed to be on the floor without your hairnet and mask on." She shoved a hairnet on my head, then hooked a mask around my ears. "Now, where's your station?" I said, my eyes darting around as she watched me impatiently. "How long have you worked here?" she said, seeing my indecision. "First day," I lied. She sighed heavily. "You're not even supposed to be on the floor yet. You have videos to watch." I shrugged. "Wait here," she said. He'll go find someone to take you upstairs and start your videos." I waited long enough for her to leave the room. Then I roamed around trying to find Kenny. I walked past line after line of people sorting through chunks of meat, tossing aside parts that weren't usable, or at least weren't usable for the main product. The bad parts were tossed into plastic bins. As I walked by, I saw some interesting things in the bins. As I walked by, someone grabbed me and pulled me over to the line beside them. "What the hell are you doing here?" Kenny hissed. "Looking for you," I said. "Okay, you found me. Now get out of here," he said, going back to sorting. "Not until you tell me what's going on," I said, standing beside him and sorting pieces of meat. "If I promise to tell you everything later, will you leave?" I hesitated. My curiosity had been piqued. "What the hell is going on here?" I said, tossing a piece of rotten-looking meat into a bin. He sighed. "Later. We can't talk about it now," I grimaced, knowing that he wouldn't let me in on the secret. I glared at him when suddenly I saw the supervisor come back and look for me. "Promise me we'll talk about this tonight at work," I said. "I promise." I turned around and walked away from him. She saw me and made a beeline for me. "What were you doing on the line when you haven't been properly trained?" Deciding what? That this job isn't for me," I said, handing her my hairnet and mask. "I quit." She stared at me, jaw hanging open, as I stormed off. I glanced back to see her narrowing her eyes in Kenny's direction. I made my way back out to the hallway and followed the red line back to where I had come into the building. I reached the exit door when I heard a familiar deep voice, "Decided it's not for you, eh?" I turned to see the security guard who had at me on the way in. "That job's not for anyone," I said. "Yeah, it's no tiptoe through the tulips. What? It's an old saying. Never mind. Why are you going out this way?" I suddenly remembered I was on the wrong side of the building. I figured I'd walk around to get some fresh air. He narrowed his eyes at me. I went for broke and bolted for the door. I could hear him running behind me. "Stop," he yelled, much closer than I liked. I didn't obey. Instead, I hit the crash bar so hard I nearly knocked myself backward. The door flung open and smashed against the outside wall. I hit the open air and was around the corner before I knew it. I flew through the brush up to the fence and panicked when I couldn't find the open section right away. He was still in pursuit, but further behind. He must have lost sight of me for a minute. I ran along the fence, pushing on it as I went and growing more desperate with every moment. If I was stuck inside the fence, it would lead me right to the main entrance, and I'd be caught. I was sweating from running, but also from the thought of going to jail. When a section of fence gave way when I pushed it, I breathed a quick sigh of relief as I dove through the open fence to freedom. I ran to my car, not even thinking about the briars that had torn at my uniform and skin. I dove into the car and took off home. Only once I was moving did I look back and see Kenny's car sitting there, partially hidden. I wondered why he was being so secretive. I wondered if I had compromised him by leading them so close to his car. As I drove, my breathing returned to normal, followed by an adrenaline crash. I barely made it home and fell into bed. I looked at the clock and realized I was late for work. I didn't have time to change, shower, or anything. I just ran out the door and hopped in my car. The drive to work was a blur. I hoped I wouldn't get pulled over. I wasn't sure what he meant until I went to the bathroom and saw myself. My uniform looked like it had been run through a shredder. There were tears all over the shirt and pants. My narrow escape through the brush had not been kind. I cringed at the thought of dealing with customers looking like I had spent the night fighting off wild badgers. In the end, there was nothing I could do. I'd have to get a new uniform to replace this one and use one of my backups. I came out of the bathroom and nearly ran over Kenny. "You ready to spill your guts yet?" "What are you talking about?" he said with a blank stare. "That's not funny," I said. "You promised you'd talk to me tonight." "I am talking to you. You're a real comedian. Now spill it." "Spill what?" And not laughing, "Kenny, talk to me." He looked at me and his eyes glazed over. It scared me. "Are you okay, man?" I said. "I'm fine." "Okay. What do you remember about this morning?" His eyes went a deeper glaze as he fell into a 1,000-yard stare. He didn't say anything for a long moment, and then it was like he woke up from a nap and looked at me. "I went home and went to bed." I took a step back from him. "No, man, you didn't." "I didn't. You went to the distribution center." "Why would I do that?" I tried my best to find any sign he was joking, but I couldn't, and I knew him well enough to tell when he was serious. He was dead serious and believed every word he was saying. "You told me you had found something out," I said. "What?" "I don't know. You said you would tell me tonight." His eyes lit up with curiosity. "Did I tell you?" "No," I said slowly. "I was waiting for you to tell me. I wonder what it was," he said, his eyes becoming unfocused. "Okay. Man, you're scaring me." Just then there came a beep telling me someone had ordered food. "I gotta get that," I said, staring at him as he stood there like a robot trying to figure out an equation. I ran to the kitchen and started preparing the order. When it was nearly done, I saw Kenny come to the register and ring up the customer. "Number 38, I called out, setting the bag of food on the counter. I glanced up and froze when I saw who came for the bag. It was the security guard from the distribution center. "So, this is where you really work," he said, grabbing the bag. He shot me a sinister smile as he walked out. My fear melted, replaced with anger. I ran out the door after him. "Hey," I yelled as he reached for his car door. "Yeah." I approached slowly. "What did you do to my friend?" "Who?" "The cashier," I said, pointing inside to Kenny standing there behind the counter looking like a statue. The security guard took a long look at him, then got a scared look in his eye. "I have to go," he said, ripping his door open and diving inside. "What did you do to him?" I said, grabbing his car door and holding it open. "Get away from me," he said. "Tell me first." His eyes darted all around. "I can't talk to you," he said, barely opening his lips and staring straight ahead. "Why not?" His eyes darted up to one of the many security cameras, then back, staring straight ahead. He ripped the door out of my hand, closed it, and roared out of the parking lot. I watched him go, more confused now than ever. I slowly looked around, and for the first time realized just how many cameras were aimed at the parking lot. I went back inside and did my job for the rest of the night, trying not to let my eyes drift up to any of the cameras. I kept my eye on Kenny, too, watching for any stray glances out of character, anything that would tell me he was joking. One didn't see one all night. The longer he went, the more scared I became. When our shift was over, I offered to drive him home, but he said he would be fine and drove off looking like a robot zombie. I wondered if he would make it. I tried to sleep that day, but I couldn't get my mind to shut down. It hadn't been 2 weeks since Kenny had found that ring and started his quest for the truth. I got out of bed having slept maybe an hour and dragged myself to the bathroom when there was a knock at my door. I answered it, and there stood the security guard. "What are you doing here?" I said through bleary eyes. "Can I come in?" "I don't know. Are you going to arrest me for trespassing?" "Should I?" I started to close the door. "No, I'm going to tell you what happened to your friend." I stopped and reopened the door. He stepped inside, giving the place a quick once-over. "Okay, so what happened?" He asked too many questions. "What do you mean?" He sighed. "I've worked at that place for a while now, and one of the things I've learned is you don't ask questions." "I don't get it." "He showed up about a week or so ago. He just blended in and started working on the line. Next thing I know, I'm hearing workers talk about someone causing trouble. I narrowed it down to your friend and tried to talk some sense into him, but he wasn't having it. That day that you pulled your escape act, they pulled him in and had a discussion with him, and that's what made him go all zombie on me." "You don't get it. The guards said they'd drugged him." "What?" "They have this drug they use that slowly eats away your brain until there's nothing left." "Wait, they're killing him? That's the way it works. But why?" He looked around the room as if searching for something specific. "Do you have an Alexa or any other stuff like that?" "No, just my phone." "Give it to me." I hesitantly handed him my phone, and he proceeded to remove the battery. "If they find out I'm telling you this, it'll be next. Telling me what? The chickens? What about them?" "They aren't chickens. What the hell are you talking about?" "They have a system. They drive unmarked white vans out into the streets, round up homeless people, and take them to the distribution center. Once they have them there, they give them a much more powerful dose of the drug your friend is on. It kills their brains within hours. Then they process what's left." I stared at him for a long time. "So you're saying the chicken nuggets aren't chicken?" I ran to the bathroom and vomited in the toilet. When I came back out, he hadn't moved. "That can't be real," I said. "That's horror movie stuff." "You might be surprised how much stuff you see in movies that's secretly real." "So you're saying my friend was poisoned?" He nodded, because he asked too many questions. He nodded again. "Then why is he still alive?" "I don't know. Maybe as a warning to you, me. You were there too. That's how they work. They can get to you anywhere. They can slip it into your food or drink. They can mail you a letter with the drug on it. They can slip it on your car's door handle. It is just street people they grab. Protesters, whistleblowers, anyone who threatens their business. Do you know how many people disappear in this city every day?" "No. Let's just say they process a lot of chicken." "What about all those workers? Wouldn't they know it wasn't chicken?" "They give them a lower dose, just enough to keep them from asking questions." I looked around the room. "Okay, where's the hidden camera?" His eyes darted around. "What camera?" "The one for the reality show or whatever you and Kenny are in on to prank me." "You don't believe me, I don't believe you." He hung his head. "I stuck my neck out to come warn you." "Well, I appreciate the warning," I said sarcastically. He turned and walked to the door. "Just keep an eye on your friend," he said, opening the door, "and watch out for white vans." He closed the door behind him. It was nearly time to go to work. I shook off the thought that was clinging to the back of my brain. What if he was right? I showered and dressed and made it to work on time. The shift was uneventful except for my continual attempts to snap Kenny out of it. He didn't respond. It was just before 3 a.m. when I saw a white van pull up. No one got out of it, and I couldn't see inside because it had tinted glass. I shrugged it off and went back to my job, mopping the kitchen floor. The guard's words came to me as I was doing my chores. I looked back out at the white van, but it was gone. I shrugged and went back to cleaning. A few minutes later, I came out of the back room because someone was yelling. "Isn't anyone working around here?" An angry man raged at the counter. "I'm sorry," I said. "The cashier must be in the bathroom." I took care of him, then went on a mission to find Kenny. In his condition, he could have wandered off somewhere or gotten stuck in a closet. 20 minutes later, I was frantic. I hadn't seen hide nor hair of Kenny. I was even tempted to check on the roof, but the access ladder was still locked. It was starting to get busy, and I didn't have time to search for him anymore. Between cooking and running register, I was falling behind by the second. I had a lot of irate customers by the time day shift came in and bailed me out. I was so far behind I stayed for an extra hour just to help them catch up. After my shift, I went to the supervisor. "I'm worried about Kenny," I said. "It's not like him just to disappear like that. Maybe he got sick and went home without telling you. Maybe. But then why is his car still here?" He looked at the security monitors, and sure enough, Kenny's car was still sitting in the employees' parking lot. "That is weird. Tell you what, if he calls and he'll give you a call." "Fair enough," I said, yawning. I drove home and fell into a deep sleep. When I woke, I felt more refreshed than I had in days. I went into work that night expecting to find Kenny there laughing at me for falling for such an awesome prank. He wasn't there. Instead, I had someone from day shift who had volunteered to work overtime. For 3 days, Kenny didn't show up. On the 4th day, I got a surprise. In the morning, I was making food orders when I called an order number and the guard walked up to take his food. "Hey, have you seen Kenny at all?" I said. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" he said. "Haha, very funny." "Seriously," I said, leaning closer. "Do you think they did something to him?" "Who did what to who?" I looked into his eyes and let go of his bag of food. He had the same vacant stare Kenny did just before he disappeared. "You have a good day now," he said with a smile before walking out. I suddenly felt surrounded and alone at the same time. I glanced up at one of the cameras. As its mechanical eye stared back at me, I stopped questioning what happened to Kenny. Deep down, I knew. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. They towed his car out of the lot. I don't know where it went to. Maybe there's a corporate car crusher for the vehicles of their victims. The worst part is they continue to get away with it. I wish there was some way I could prove what I know, but I can't. Without going into the distribution center and getting evidence, I've got nothing. I keep coming to work for some reason. I've started looking for another job. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I wanted to write more of what I remembered in my journal, but my thoughts seemed to slip away so easily. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. It's been a few days since I've written anything, I think, or has it been a few weeks? I keep getting thirstier for soda. Am glad the company lets us have free soda when we work. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I keep looking up at the cameras for some reason, but I can't remember why. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I read the words on the page, but don't remember writing them. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I see a white van pull up. It must be a customer. It's nearly 3 in the morning. I hope they come in before the power surge.